The Dragonback series by Timothy Zahn. Book 2, Dragon and Soldier. Chapter 10. 4 days later, the recruits graduated. Jack had never been through a graduation ceremony before. Of course, he'd never been in school before either. All of his formal education had been given to him aboard the SNA, with Uncle Virgil more or less presiding over the procedure. He would have laid good odds, though, that this graduation was vastly different from most. The ceremony didn't last very long, for one thing. Grisco and the other drill sergeants got the recruits into formation and ran them through a few maneuvers in front of a small group of officers in full dress uniform. Colonel Elcor and Lieutenant Basht were among them, but Jack didn't recognize any of the others. After the maneuvers, they all stood at attention while Elcor gave a speech. A short speech, fortunately, mostly consisting of telling them how lucky they were to be members of the Wynyard's Edge and how proud the Wynyard's Edge was to have them. After that, Lieutenant Basht read off the squad and platoon listings, told them they would be leaving camp at 0700 the next morning, and ordered them to fall out. After that, the sergeants loaded their new mercenaries aboard transports and flew them to a nearby town for a party.
"A curious ritual,"
Dracos commented as Jack headed toward the restroom for his third trip.
"But is not alcohol a depressant for your people?"
Sure is, Jack confirmed, looking around as he pushed his way past the groups of brand new edgemen crowding the tavern. Most of them were already half drunk, either laughing and staggering or else passed out on the tables where they sat. A few were huddled in corners, looking miserable, probably trying not to throw up. I don't know why Grisco and the others are even putting up with this, let alone encouraging it. Dracos remained silent until Jack reached the privacy and relative quiet of the restroom.
"There is no deep mystery to their actions,"
the dragon said.
"The children are drinking alcohol to pretend they have become adults. The officers allow it because they believe the experience will bond the members of each platoon together."
Jack snorted. "Mostly what it'll do is make them feel lousy," he said. "Not a single one of these kids has any idea what they're doing. Probably the first time any of them has even tasted the stuff."
"Unlike you,"
Jack shrugged. "Uncle Virgil taught me to drink in case I ever had to do it for some con scheme," he told the dragon. "And right after he did, he told me to never even look at the stuff if I didn't absolutely have to. In case you haven't noticed, I'm still on my first beer, and I've only finished half of that. Mostly I've been drinking water."
"I had noticed,"
Draco said.
"I see that in some areas Uncle Virgil did indeed have good judgment."
"What Uncle Virgil had was a well-developed survival instinct," Jack said as he dug under his shirt and pulled out his comm clip. In our business, even a little fog on the brain could be fatal. Fogged reflexes, too. I never knew when we might have to drop everything and make a run for the tall grass." He took a deep breath as he lifted the comm clip. "Uncle Verge isn't going to like this," he warned. Uncle Verge didn't.
"This is not the deal we made, Jack lad," the computer growled. "Not the deal at all."
"You don't hear me doing cartwheels of joy either, do you?" Jack asked. "There isn't any other way."
"Of course there is,"
Uncle Verge said, suddenly gone all soothing and persuasive.
"Look, lad, it's over. I know you've done your best, but the hand's been lost, the jackpot's been taken off the table, and it's time to face reality. You and your poet warrior friend have no choice but to take this to the Star Force."
"We've been through this, Uncle Verge," Jack reminded him. "It isn't safe for Dracos to show himself around."
"But it's safe for him to drag you into a war zone," Uncle Verge countered. "Besides, if Dracos gets himself killed, what happens to his people?"
"I will not be killed,"
Dracos said calmly.
"Nor will I allow Jack to be harmed."
"Big promises," Uncle Verge huffed. "How exactly do you intend to make amends if you're wrong? A signed apology from the grave?"
"I'm not going to argue with you," Jack cut him off. He was nervous enough without bringing up the subject of graves. "We're going, and that's that. You want to hear the plan or don't you?
Go ahead.
Uncle Verge muttered, sulking now. Jack laid it out for him. Uncle Verge was not impressed.
That's the plan?
He demanded scornfully.
That house of buttered toast is the best Yar poet warrior can come up with. No wonder his people are losing their war.
Jack winced, not daring to look down at Dracos. Yes, that's it, he told Uncle Verge stubbornly. The only question is whether we do it on our own or whether you come along to help. Well,
of course I'll help,
Uncle Verge muttered, back to sulking again.
You know where you'll be?
It's the Edge's November 6 outpost, Jack told him. According to the map they showed us, it's just to the south of Bear Mountain and the southwestern part of the Gray Hills. Can you pull up a map?
Yes, Uncle Verge said. Yes, I have it.
Basht said we'd be flying into a major parprin town called Mersheb, Jack told him. From there, our squad will take a transport up to November 6. I'm guessing Mersheb is where the Edge's HQ and mainframe computer are, but you'll need to check on that. Got it?
Of course, Uncle Verge said.
Okay, Jack said. Incidentally, you weren't by any chance poking around the training camp last Tuesday night, were you?
Certainly not, Uncle Verge said. I'm right here in the spaceport where you left me. Why?
Just wondering, Jack said. There was something off by the fence that night that had the patrols stirred up for a while, that's all.
Did it cause you any trouble?
Actually, it did us a favor, Jack said. That's what opened up the grounds and gave us a clear run at the HQ building.
Where you weren't able to get what you needed, Uncle Verge said pointedly, which is why we're going with this other lunatic plan. Some favor.
Jack felt his lip twitch. I suppose.
But I suppose we're stuck with it now, Uncle Verge went on. I don't suppose you happen to know where the actual battle lines are drawn on Sunright?
Jack glanced down at Dracos, got a sideways slide of the head in return. Not a clue, he said, but we should be able to figure it out once we see which direction the shots are coming from.
Not funny, Jack lad,
Uncle Verge said darkly. He had a point. Sorry, Jack apologized.
With tired arms,
Dracos murmured,
and eyes fatigued, the soldiers stood to mark the deed.
That isn't funny either,
Uncle Verge growled. Sorry for both of us in that case, Jack said, frowning down at Dracos. What had that been all about? I have to go. We'll see you on Sunright. He clicked off the comm clip and tucked it away again inside his shirt. Well, he's not happy, he commented, but he didn't go completely frantic on us either. That's a good sign.
Or else he merely recognizes he has no choice but to obey.
Maybe, Jack conceded. What was that tired arms thing you said to him?
It is part of a poem,
Dracos said.
I have been working on translating my poetry into your language. I often recite parts of it to Uncle Verge late at night while you sleep.
Jack had to grin at that. Uncle Virgil had always despised poetry, which meant that the computerized Uncle Verge probably did too. I bet he just loves that. So what part didn't he think was funny?
It was a poem about the Battle of Chatai,
Dracos said, his voice low and grim.
There, the Kada and Shantine held a bridge against the Valaga, while a group of alien civilians escaped behind them. What the warriors did not know was that some of the civilians had been turned by the enemy, and soon they were being attacked from both sides.
Jack winced. I can see why he didn't like it. Did they all, die?
Actually, most of them escaped safely,
Draco said.
It was your comment about not knowing where the battle lines were drawn that brought that part of our war to my mind. So it was not Uncle Verge near the camp that night.
I guess not, Jack said. I hadn't really thought he would have been that careless anyway.
Which returns us to the question of what did stir up the patrols,
Dracos pointed out. I don't know, Jack said. Maybe they were just jumping at shadows.
Trained soldiers usually do not do that.
I suppose. Jack looked down at the dragon's head beneath his shirt. By the way, I want to apologize for what Uncle Verge said about your people losing their war.
No apology is necessary,
The dragon said calmly.
I understand his motivation. Having failed to argue us out of our plan, he was attempting to shame us out of it.
Ah, Jack said. Yes, that was definitely something from Uncle Virgil's old bag of tricks. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm glad you didn't take offense.
I did not say I did not take offense,
Draco said. His voice was still calm, but there was a thin layer of ice on it.
I merely said I understood. Either way, though, the fault is not yours.
Jack swallowed. Okay, was all he could think of to say. Well, let's get back to the party. The transports left the camp at precisely 0700 the next morning, bright and shiny and efficient. Unfortunately, the same could not be said for their passengers. Most of them, to quote one of Uncle Virgil's favorite phrases, looked like death warmed over and stuck to the pan. Most were pale and limp. Some looked like they'd just done a 20-mile hike, and a few were practically sleepwalking as they stumbled aboard the transports. Amid such company, Jack knew, someone as fresh and unhungover as he was would be a little too noticeable. He picked a role somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, hanging his head as he shuffled along. Occasionally, he made sure to bump into the person on either side of him. The transfer of the various spacecraft that were waiting for them an hour later wasn't much better, but at least no one got accidentally left behind. As far as Jack ever heard, none of them fogged their way aboard the wrong ship either. The trip to Sunright took 7 days. Tango 5 Zulu was one of 3 squads from their training group going to this particular world. Sergeant Grisco and Lieutenant Basht were along too, though Basht made it clear he would only be staying long enough to write up a report on the current situation there. There were also 200 regular Wynyard's Edge mercenaries aboard, heading in to reinforce the 800 troops already there. The numbers struck Jack as rather ominous. A 25% increase in ground forces meant the Edge was either making a major push for victory or scrambling madly to avoid defeat. Either way, it was likely there was going to be shooting, possibly a lot of it. Starting with the second day of the flight, after everyone had recovered from their hangovers, Basht had Tango 5 Zulu start their equipment preparation. They now had the actual fold-top computers they would be taking up to November 6th with them, and it took the better part of 2 days to load the various codes and data onto them from the ship's main computer. The rest of the time was spent practicing the computer drills they'd learned back on Carrion. They would continue practicing, Bash declared several times, until they were able to run them in their sleep. Jack wasn't sure they ever got that good at it, but he had to admit that Bash pushed them at least halfway there. By the time they reached Sunright, the whole squad was dreaming about the drills. Finally, yet all too soon, they had arrived. The town of Merseb was nestled into a narrow river valley, its tightly packed buildings surrounded by tall, thickly forested hills. A slow river wound lazily through the center of town from the east, taking a sharp southern turn a half-mile or so beyond the western edges. Between the town and the river curve was a large area of mostly flat stone. It was on this natural landing pad that the Wynyard's Edge spaceship set down. The adult Edgemen had obviously been through this routine before. They lined up at the airlock hatchway in full combat gear, rifles and machine guns slung for marching. When the hatch opened, they strode out and down the ramp, forming quickly into 6-man ranks. Marching in step, they headed into the city along a typically paraffin, straight-as-an-arrow street. At Grisco's direction, the 3 teenage squads fell in at the back end of the column. Well, this is fun, Jommy muttered under his breath from beside Jack as they marched past the first row of houses at the edge of town. They planning to walk us the whole way to the outpost? Probably just to the main Edge HQ, Allison said from Jommy's other side. It's on the far side of town. How do you know where it is? Jommy asked suspiciously. I saw the flag from the top of the ramp, she said mildly. You really need to pay more attention to details, Randolph. Jommy muttered something inaudible under his breath. Oh, come on, she chided him. Frost up, okay? It can't be more than a mile or 2.
Yeah, but what's the point?
He growled. They're probably showing us off, Allison said. Look at the people. Keeping his face forward as he'd been taught, Jack threw a sideways glance at the parapets lining the street. Quite a few of them had come out to see the parade, all right. Mostly females and their children, though there were also a few of the taller males mixed in. He frowned, taking a second look. The thin parapet faces always seemed sad to him, but these parapets looked even sadder than usual. The children huddled close by their mothers, and the males tended to stand in groups of 2 or 3, talking softly together.
They don't look very happy to see us, he pointed out quietly. Maybe they don't know we're here to help them, Jami muttered sarcastically.
Or maybe they think this whole thing has gotten out of hand, Allison suggested slowly. Maybe they don't think their mine is worth all this.
Isn't worth what? Jami scoffed. Defending from poachers?
Not worth completely scrambling their lives for, Allison countered. My father used to say that lawyers and soldiers came out of the same expensive box. If you couldn't settle things without them, you weren't going to like what it cost to settle things with them.
Jami grunted. Your dad must have been a real kick to grow up with.
Allison didn't answer. They continued on in silence. Jack kept his eyes moving, wishing he knew how to read Parapan faces better. Maybe he was only imagining their discomfort. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they looked like people watching an occupying army march through their town. They reached an area of 3- and 4-story buildings, obviously the town's main business district. Here the females and their children were replaced by parapan males, most of them wearing the brightly colored robes of shopkeepers or the only slightly drabbier sparkle cloth of businessmen. There were also quite a few aliens of different species represented in the crowd, and even an occasional human. Apparently, Merseb was a trading center for many of the alien enclaves and colonies scattered around this region of the planet. Again, it seemed to Jack that a lot of the parapens here whispering together as the mercenaries marched past. The rest stood in silence, watching the procession. The other aliens, in contrast, mostly glanced at the spectacle and then moved on. No one cheered or waved.
I got it, Jami said suddenly. They just don't realize it's a parade, that's all. We should have brought a brass band with us.
That's funny, Allison said scornfully. Personally, I was just thinking about how much I was enjoying the silence. And at that instant, almost as if on cue, the silence of the crowd was abruptly broken. From all around them, the city erupted in noise, the distant thunder of small rockets, the closer rattle of machine gun fire, the shouts and screams of the injured and the dying and the terrified. The Wynyard's edge was under attack,